Here live to kick things off. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Tonight was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday. I'm going to get right into it and start with Corey. I have to. As my friend texted me, my friend Nicole texted me this week, two things are keeping this election really interesting. One is Corey and one is Trump. Okay, you're
God, that's not good.
Okay, you made a lot of news this week for your take on the Conservative campaign. In your view, at this moment in time, just past the halfway mark, heading into the last 2 weeks, what is the state of this race?
Well, it's not great if you're a Conservative, and it's really not great if you're in the NDP. So I don't know, maybe Scott should be bragging today. But I think for both our parties, it's pretty challenging. Like, look, a little surprised how much news I made this past week because I think, really it was like Captain Obvious. Like it's basically reading the headline of the polls. But we went into this electoral cycle 25 points up, and we're running behind. And it's a campaign reversal that is pretty unprecedented in terms of the size and scope of it. We'll see what happens next week, in particular with the debates. But it's challenging days for the Conservative Party, and it's challenging days, I think, for the NDP as well.
I want to pull. We'll talk about the NDP in a second. I just want to sort of talk about the state of the race outside of it for a moment, and I'm going to pull a clip from Pierre Poilievre, who was asked very directly this week about your criticism of the campaign, Corey, and just play how he responded, and we'll talk about that for a moment.
Liberals and lobbyists want me to stop talking about high food prices. Well, I'm not going to do that because single mothers shouldn't be going to bed hungry, worried about how they're going to feed their kids in the morning. They want me to stop talking about the doubling housing costs during the lost Liberal decade. I'm not going to stop talking about that. They want me to stop talking about the rampaging crime that's overtaking our streets and the overdose crisis Liberals caused that has taken the lives of 50,000 people. I will not stop talking about that either.
So, Kathleen, I sort of get part of what the Conservatives are saying. Like, if they were to abandon talking about all the stuff that, drove people to them last year, it would feel in and of itself inauthentic. Is there something they can do, though, to address sort of what Corey's laying out and what public opinion polls are showing?
I'm not sure if Pierre Poilievre is able to recalibrate the campaign. I don't think he has that kind of flexibility. People have talked about him, Corey in particular, about how he's actually a really great political athlete, able to do a fabulous communicator, incredible debater, able to prosecute a case. Actually, he's been to the point about affordability and the affordability crisis, he was one of the first ones to seize on that and really mine that for the political wealth that's there.
Far away from far in front of everyone.
Exactly.
Else, yeah.
But it's almost like in this campaign, it's like he's a Frankenstein trying to become Fred Astaire. He does not have the grace to be able to do what he needs to do in this campaign right now. And he's failing as a result. His attacks on Carney are falling flat. I mean, if the best that you can come up with is you got a bad haircut, I'm not sure if you're fit to lead, And I actually think that he hasn't been able to move to the Trump and really show Canadians, because what Canadians want, they want the positive throw. They want to know that you're standing up for them. And I'm not sure if they feel that Poilievre at this point is willing to take the fight to Trump in the same way that we've seen the other leaders try to do.
Do you agree, first, Scott, with the assessment that, the Conservatives have essentially failed to I guess, make Mark Carney the bad guy or seize, I would argue, maybe on some of the very obvious vulnerabilities, and we laid them out at the front of the show. Like there were some, and we'll play them a little bit later on, but there were some testy moments. There are some questions that go unanswered. Why do you think they have not been able to capitalize, I guess, on that?
Well, I think it can come down to one thing, fundamentally, Trump and choices. That's two things, technically. But then again, we just had a Mel Brooks reference, so I guess we're kind of winging it today. Look, I think that this was the week where we thought, well, maybe the Conservatives will get some space to express their own narrative, to make a little bit of a shift, to plug into the campaign, and perhaps we'll be a little bit free of Trump. And of course, that was a fool's hope, because immediately the markets went haywire. Then there was a day where Trump appeared as though he was slapping a new tariff on Canada, only to be told later maybe he wasn't slapping it on Canada. And then, of course, China and the United States are now wrestling like giants right across us. So all of that, I mean, let's we get caught up in the minutia of the campaign. But I do think we need to remind ourselves that it is Trump that is driving a lot of attitudes on the part of voters. And they still haven't figured out how to manage the Trump question. And Trump was on our minds and on our phones and on our television screens all week long. And I think that's the essential part. And then when they are getting a moment of airspace on their own, what is he doing? He's having a Trumpy-like talkback with a female reporter, Polyev, or he's holding giant rallies that evoke Trump, feel like Trump, smell like MAGA, and they actually have people with sweatshirts that say, don't believe the polls. Now, there's a confident message. Don't believe the polls. We're not losing. Don't measure the size of our vote. Measure the size of the hall. It's if this was supposed to be the week where they were making an adjustment and a move, it has not shown up.
I think what's informing a lot, and not to justify it necessarily, Corey, but there are, and I'm sure you've talked to them as well, but there are a lot of conservatives who feel like the modeling that polls are based on is based on, for example, 2019 and 2021, that the Polyev base is not the Sheeran O'Toole base. It's not fully being captured. Obviously, the manifestation of that has differed at some of these rallies, but there are thousands of people coming out. And they're saying, like, how do you, those two things are difficult to reconcile. Are they at all difficult for you to reconcile?
I don't think so. I think that there's a very hardened activist component to the Conservative Party, particularly under Polyev. And we've seen it since his leadership campaign. He's tapped into, I think, a lot of the frustration and animosity that has been out there on a range of issues. But if you're looking at his leadership campaign, the size of the rallies that he was getting in, I think were unprecedented. So I think it's in keeping with that. But I am wondering, like, in this moment, is this smart strategy, or is this just chasing the dopamine high of talking to thousands of people every night, as opposed to actually trying to go after the voters that, if you want to disagree or agree with the polls, whatever the case may be, there are a lot of people that were supporting the Conservatives 4 months ago that are not now. And the reason that they're not is overwhelmingly related to the tariff fight and Donald Trump and they're overwhelmingly female voters. And I think, positioning yourself in such close proximity to Trump stylistically, rhetorically, is getting in the way of the message that they're trying to talk about. And so why would you keep doing that? Well, because I think it's a bit of a head rush to go and speak to those big crowds. I think that it's almost a bit of a sensation, but it creates, I think, a false feedback loop as well, where we're doing so great, we're doing so well. Look at this, look at this. Here's the sad truth. For conservatives like myself and others across the country, we aren't doing so well right now. And it feels like we've had kind of a series of own goals.
Just really quickly, is it the stylistic thing that is the vulnerability? Because, again, to be fair to them, they have put a ton of policy in the window when it comes to responding to Trump. He is out there very fast after every announcement from Trump saying, knock it off, don't do this, I'm opposed to this isn't fair, it isn't justified. Like, why isn't that landing?
I think the Liberals have done what they often do, which is to adopt policies from either the left or the right, which are resonating and making them their own. And I think they've done that on a series of areas here on the Conservatives. I think part of what the quiet ballot question that Carney is offering is, I'm going to give you all of Poilievre's policy, but none of the a-hole.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of what they're doing. But we've seen this from the Liberals time and time again. They've done it, with Kathleen and the NDP in the past. They've done it to the Conservatives in the past, and they're doing it again now. This is not entirely unexpected. It's, I think, kind of standard operating procedure for the Liberals.
Why do you think, Kathleen, it's working, if in fact the public opinion polls are true?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the interesting data points from the polls right now is just how few undecided voters there actually are out there. I think Nanos had 7% undecided. I think Main Street had 5%. And you wonder, did people really lock and load their decision around this election almost, sometime in February, mid-March, because of the Trump threat? And they're not really moving. And so what I find that's falling flat is, yes, all the things that Scott mentioned, the aggressiveness with journalists and and the kind of negativity, but also the fact that Pierre Poilievre is kind of criticizing Carney for being a prime minister. I think that criticism really falls flat, because actually most Canadians want their politicians just to get the job done. They actually don't want to see them all the time. They want capable, competent, smart people running our country and delivering the services. And that's unfortunately right now what they're seeing in Carney. Whether that's true or not.
It made sense the other two. This week it was weird. It was like one day where he, showed up as prime minister and took no question, and we didn't even really understand why. I think that criticism made sense to me, but otherwise, I take your point. Scott, I'll give you the last word, and I actually, just before we take a break, we'll ask you about the NDP, and then we'll do some more on it after that break with Kathleen and Corey. We've talked extensively about their loss at the Liberals' gain. What do you think is driving that? It continues to be amplified throughout the race.
Two things. One, fear of Trump. Second, fear of a conservative government, which felt like that's where we were headed until, very recently. And I don't know that the reality of where the polls actually stand and maybe where the voters are headed has sunk into a lot of voters yet. And consequently, a lot of NDP voters are choosing to vote strategically for fear of those things they fear even more. Look, if the Conservatives are distracted by this sort of fool's gold fever, where they think crowds are where the voters will really end up, you can feel the sense of just plain fever settling into the NDP, where they are beginning to realize that they may be down to fewer than a dozen seats, and they don't have an obvious way of hanging on to their vote. They almost need, in order to win, people to see that they're losing. They almost need people to realize that Mark Carney is on the march toward a large majority government. Maybe that will give NDP voters the comfort that they can vote for their own party without fear of losing, and having without fear of losing the dynamic and having a conservative majority.